Okay, so a lot has happened in the sports world in the last few days, pretty much overnight with the Super League. I'm going to start on the Super League. There's other things I can discuss later on, but the Toronto Wolfpack will not be returning to Super League next season. That means they have to put out, as the RFL and the Super League have to put out a tender for the 12th team. So teams from League One and the Championship have to put forward a bid to enter. There are some saying Toulouse should be given the place, and some saying Broncos. Others says it should be an open and fair process. But the Wolfpack, it should come as no surprise. Um, the it's it's an interesting one, the Wolfpack, but they're not coming back to Super League next season. But it's a situation that should never have happened. Um, so you could argue that the RFL, the Super League, and the rugby league structure in Europe, in England and France, needs restructuring anyway when it comes to governance, and the fact that the clubs that constitute the Super League are able to vote out another club from competing. Have I been hit? No, it's just the lighting. Just the lighting. Nothing there. No, just the lighting. I better change the angle of the laptop maybe. Let's move that a little bit. Let's just turn that off. Better. Um, so yes, the Super League has voted to revoke Toronto coming back. Now, I've done videos on will the Wolfpack play in the Super League next year, and I was saying a whole host of issues were going against them in that regard. Now, the Super League season has also been curtailed. Hull KR have recorded multiple positive tests and say they cannot complete the season with how many positives they've had. And I was having a debate with a rugby league page on Facebook that actually invited me to do a podcast for them. And I broached the question: what do you reckon of the Super League completing the season with the 15-team league and the fixtures in place? And I said, what is the likelihood of them not completing? He said, very high. Now, there's been a whole host of games called off in recent weeks in regards to the Super League because of positive tests. Wakefield and Hull KR have been particularly badly hit in recent weeks. I'm going to turn that light back on because it actually improves the lighting in the room. So the Super League's in a bit of a mess. Yes, I have now obviously read the article that you shared in regards with Wasps, and it's to do with the Ricoh Arena as well. The Ricoh Arena has been a nightmare since it was built in Coventry, replacing Highfield Road. Obviously, Coventry City fans know about their issues with that. And Wasps and Coventry City have actually been at war over the ground share because Wasps now own the Ricoh. And so they've not allowed Coventry to be tenants in a stadium that they once called home. The Wasp situation is a mess, much like the Salford Red Devils in the Super League. That there are concerns with the finances there, but Wasps' relocation didn't necessarily go down well with all fans when they relocated from London. Originally, they were playing in Wickham at one point, their home games. And at another point, they were playing at other stadiums in the London area. They relocated to Coventry a few seasons ago, but their position is not great. Wasps are in financial trouble. What happens going forward? As I said throughout the summer and into the autumn, the sports will survive. How many teams make it through this period and that doesn't matter what sport we're looking at. We're looking at a whole host of elite sports. A lot of teams risk going bust. So the sports will survive. We will still play them. We will still watch them. We will still support them. But how many teams will survive to Christmas, let alone next year, is an unknown. And that's an interesting note, is how many teams will survive. And yes, I will admit this, Wasps, having read the situation they're in, I've heard rumours about the situation with Wasps over the last, let's say, 12 months. It's before COVID they were having problems. It's to do with the Ricoh Arena, partly, and their purchase of it. There has been concerns with Wasps for a while. The rugby union in general, there are concerns to do with the financial viability of the sport, and this was the debate had last year. to do with rugby union's finances when it came to the World Rugby election, and Augustin Pichot, coming forward with his plans to restructure the sport financially, and that includes at club level. There were some saying that the top paid talent should get paid less, and those on the lower salaries in the professional game should get paid a little bit more. The Wasp situation is sort of unique, and it's to do with the stadium. But I don't know enough about the whole situation with the Ricoh and Coventry City and Wasps to really make a full in-depth opinion of it. But I know that the stadium is a big part to play in Wasps' financial difficulties. And with no fans in attendance, it's a mess. But yeah, I think looking at both rugby union and rugby league in this country, there are issues with the finances, and a lot of it's to do with the TV deal. A lot of clubs don't own their own stadiums, which is a massive, massive problem. They have to pay rent to another business, in a sense. We've seen this in ice hockey. Arena operators, basically going bust, and so the teams have nowhere to play. It's a long-standing issue in British ice hockey. It's sort of like the American model. A lot of football clubs don't own their own stadiums. The Salford Red Devils had a CVC, and a voluntary arrangement over insolvency dating back to 2013. So they've had financial difficulties, and they've been deducted wins, because the way the finals in rugby league's working out is it's on a wins basis. The situation with Widnes, they went into administration not that long ago. And on rugby union sides, the Saracens salary cap did expose massive flaws with the financial system within the sport. There are calls, obviously, well, they're going to get relegated anyway, but there were calls for them to be stripped of their titles. That didn't happen, so that didn't appease many. You could argue other clubs have also most likely breached the salary cap system at some point in the last 20 odd years. The Wasp situation is not to do with salary cap, but it is to do with their business model, as I said. But I don't know enough about the situation at Wasps to make a full statement on that. And it is a problem when you've got the major professional and semi-professional teams in the city all not really talking on the same page. Coventry is an interesting city. The ice hockey team have financial difficulties. The football club have had financial difficulties. The rugby clubs are at war with each other about who should play where, and sharing fan base and debating it. The rugby league club barely draws any fans and is in a situation where league play has been suspended since March. So the whole situation is a bit of a mess in Coventry when it comes to sport. Going forward, what happens? Wasps could be forced to relocate, and I think that could be the only alternative that they have. If Coventry City, the football club, can't play at the Ricoh, and Wasps' business model is unsustainable even pre-COVID, it does tell you that there is an issue there, and the Ricoh seems to be the main sticking point. The main issue is the Ricoh. The Ricoh is what's causing a lot of the problems here, and Wasps have clearly overreached themselves. They've had to get loans, which they can't repay at the moment with no fans. And yeah, rugby union as a sport is in financial difficulty, and it's not just in England; it's across the board. There are massive financial difficulties within our. There is massive financial problems within the sport globally. The sport is operating at a very unsustainable level financially. Wasps aren't the only team to have financial difficulty, and they won't be the last. But the Bristol Bears, the Bristol owner is a bit of a basket case with some of the ideas he puts forward about ring fencing the Premiership, because his team's finally got back, and it wasn't that long ago they got relegated out of the Premiership and they couldn't get back in. And if you were to ring fence, London Irish wouldn't have had their redemption. Wouldn't have X to do what they've done. And the situation with the whole Saracens thing, and the whole Bristol situation is a bit of a mess. You've got Bristol Rovers and Bristol City don't like each other. If Bristol City were to make it to the Premier League, it's been a very expensive experiment in Bristol to do it. So whether they would be financially fair play, compliant, is an interesting one. Yes, the stadium's been massively developed, and Bristol City aren't a bad club, but is their business model sustainable as well? Trying to basically steal all the fans in the Bristol area into like a massive sporting franchise. I know Bristol Rovers fans aren't particularly happy with how that's going down, and they're a rival club, but yeah, they have to be close, if not above, the salary cap with some of the signings they've had in the last couple of seasons. I think Bristol City must have obviously been in breach of financial fair play at some point. They were well. The fact that the Saracens' punishment is they get relegated, plain and simple. Ealing, I don't think would be sustainable enough. Plus, they would have to share a ground with the London Broncos. Why is it like I'm in prison? I've had a shave. I've not had a clean shave since February, so it's kind of weird having actually feeling my face. I've at some point had a beard or a goatee or a mustache goatee throughout basically most of the year, and it's all come off, and it feels rather nice to actually feel my face again rather than just fluff. My beard, it got to the point where it was annoying me. Ring fence the Premiership, I don't think works, especially with a club like Ealing that would be constantly propping up the table. That would just be a disaster when you've got a club like the size of Newcastle in the league below. You've had teams like London Irish in the Championship and Bristol themselves. Gloucester, I think, at one point were a Championship side. It doesn't work. I think that goes against how the league system has always worked in Europe, pretty much. Look at the Pro League and the mess that they're in. I mean, ring fencing would reward failure, and at which point you would then have to change the business model of every single club, and you would have to change the salary cap system, because there would have to be a draft system. You would have to draft from the Championship and below. You would have to have affiliate clubs in the league below. And I don't think they want that. You've got clubs of a reasonable size in the Championship who want to make that next step for the exposure that it gives the club and then the extra sponsorship you would get. Ring fencing, I think, would have to completely change the business model. If Wasps go out of business and Saracens, that's going to be a really interesting kettle of fish, because do we lose Wasps and Saracens and have two clubs promoted? And how viable would those clubs be? Look at London Welsh. I mean, the model as it currently stands financially is not great. But to ring fence it, you would then pretty much restrict the exposure players that would get exposure when they would get promoted. We need to possibly change the structures of rugby union club level. But ring fencing, I think that's a very negative and regressive idea. I don't think that helps grow the grassroots game and benefit it, because you would have to then change the salary cap system from what it is now to a different cap system, which would have a draft structure. And all these clubs have academies, so I don't see how that in itself works. I can understand why some clubs, for self-preservation, self-interest, but actually I think you reduce the competitiveness of the competition. London Welsh, they're two separate seasons. The first season they were in the Premiership, they had points deducted for fielding ineligible players. The second season was an absolute disaster. But the way London Welsh again were handled was diabolical. Especially the second season that they got when they got back, they went down. Second season down, came back up. The second season was very irresponsible. But again, the RFU allowed it to happen. They're the governing body. They're the ones who set the rules that the clubs have to sign up to. The mess that was London Welsh was avoidable. Saracens was avoidable. Saracens willingly signed up to a system that they knew they were going to be in breach of rules-wise. Saracens knew what they were doing when they were basically signing up to a system that they had no inclination of following a salary cap system that they agreed to. There's no club plays at Twickenham. The Stoop, which is Harlequins, is in the Twickenham area. That's where Harlequins play. But no club officially calls Twickenham home. That's the headquarters of the RFU. The club that plays nearest to Twickenham is Harlequins of the Stoop, which is about 200 metres away, but they are not the same thing. But yes, the London Welsh situation was very irresponsible, both on the part of the ownership of London Welsh, but also on the part of the Premiership and the RFU, the governing body, the league they were playing in. It was kind of clear from the beginning that things were going wrong. And I don't know what you do with that. I really don't. Governance has clearly failed rugby union for quite some time in this country, and rugby league's going the same way when clubs have the power to vote out another club from competing in the Super League. Yes, the Wolfpack should never have been allowed to be formed. Let's make that clear. The Wolfpack has been a misadventure from day one, and there were plans to bring Ottawa into the competition. I mean, there's a pandemic going on, and the RFL are still set with this idea that we can have two teams in Canada playing in the English and French league system. It's illogical, to say the least. And Toronto are in, well, whether they actually play next season at all in any league is, we'll have to wait and see. But the fact that the RFL wants the Super League to be a 12-team league. The RFL had a vote that was equal to other teams' votes. How can the governing body be outvoted by the clubs? I have no idea. The clubs could say, look, we have concerns about the viability of the league with this team in it, being able to fulfil fixtures, which is a valid concern, considering that they failed to resume play after the first 5 rounds, and they pulled out with a variety of problems, including financial issues, but visa issues, squad issues, recruitment problems, a whole host of issues dogged the Wolfpack throughout their entire history. So yeah, the Wolfpack experiment was a fiasco. And teams like the Broncos and Toulouse and Featherstone and York and other teams in the Championship that have more history actually develop local talent, and the Broncos have proven that in London. Missed out. The Super League is a mess, and the RFL is a mess, and the TV deal is a mess, and rugby league in this country. I mean, Australia have got it right. They've worked out that it's unsustainable to have a promotion relegation system because of their business models, their sporting depth, their population size, and it just doesn't work. On an Australian standpoint, culturally, it doesn't work either. And yet again, the governing body does have a lot more say over there. Clubs can vote on things, but the NRL and above them, the Australian Rugby League Commission does have a quite strong grip on the sport. Same with the AFL Commission as well, with Aussie rules. The Super League, the fact that the clubs had so much say on another team competing in the competition is what concerns me, not the fact that the Wolfpack should never have been allowed into rugby league in this country anyway. It was a vanity project that went too far. The mess and the damage, there's players who haven't been paid. There are players looking for another club. And rugby league is a sport where the players do not get paid as much as you think. There are players who play rugby league who do not get paid anywhere near as much as you think for a professional sport. They are massively underpaid for the sport they play. Massively. Rugby league players, on average, aren't paid anywhere near as much, and the salary cap is very, very low. And I actually think a League One football player gets paid more a year than, or a League Two football player possibly gets paid more a year if their club is solvent and actually can pay them than a rugby league player in the Super League. There's a reason why some of the best British talent has tried their hand overseas in the NRL, and some of them played most of their, if not all their careers in the NRL. There is a reason for that. The salary cap is significantly higher if you look at it. The competition level is of a higher level. I honestly believe that the NRL is a far more competitive competition. The next rugby player, that could be an interesting one. I think some of that could be very interesting. Honestly, I don't have any idea. I think Christian Wade is not that far away from being a squad member, a full-time squad member for the Buffalo Bills. I think he can make it. I think if cigars, they're too expensive. Yeah, I'm on my overdraft right now, so yeah, I'm just smoking me TaylorMades because I just can't afford cigars and I don't smoke cigars. I only smoke cigars on special occasions, and even then, I'm not really a heavy smoker anymore. Um, the next player that goes to the NFL, I couldn't tell you, but I think if Wasps' financial situation worsens and they do risk going bust, that is a fact. And if with Toronto being thrown out the Super League, there are rugby league and rugby union players who could very well, and the Saracen situation as well, could very well be looking for another job. I think the international player pathway hasn't necessarily produced the talent it should have, and that's something that has to be considered. But I will say this: yes, players have had a change of career, but then you look at the success of Major League Rugby and how they're taking players that didn't make it to the NFL out of college and going, look, you've been not given a chance at the NFL level. You have more chance of at least having a professional sporting career in rugby union. I think there's more chance of NFL or American football players coming over to rugby union than the other way around. I look at the CFL not having a season, for example. I think there's more chance of rugby union players and rugby union or even rugby league taking American football players than the other way around. I think it's a far easier transition to make. If I'm brutally honest, and you look at Major League Rugby, just you have to look at the amount of players there who have played American football collegiately, who haven't made it to the NFL, and some of them have played in the NFL for a couple of seasons and decided I'm not getting paid enough, I'm not getting enough games, I'm not developing as much as I want. It isn't for me, and they're athletes and they want to play professional sport, and they choose to swap codes. But I couldn't tell you which rugby union player decides to go down the international player pathway and give American football a go, because there's a minimum period of 2 years, I believe, before they can actually make a roster. I think Christian Wade has a very, very good chance within the next 12 months to get onto the Buffalo Bills main roster. But apart from that, I have my doubts over the international player pathway and has it actually been financially a good investment for the NFL. I think it's more of a PR stunt for the NFL than anything else. So we'll have to see what happens long term with the NFL poaching rugby union, rugby league players. You could argue Valentine Holmes and Jared Hayne and Christian Wade have all been given their chances in pre-season games to make squads, and Jared Hayne did make the 49ers. Valentine Holmes obviously gave it a go, but Christian Wade's still sticking at it. Holmes and Hayne went back to the NRL. So is the international player pathway actually that successful, or is it just a PR stunt in order to try and gain more fans and from a wider audience, especially the European audience, where they want to make some money? It's an interesting one. NFL Europe failed for a reason. And the fact that London still doesn't have a team, that was the NFL's plan originally, to have a team in London by the 2020s, hasn't become a reality, and I don't think it ever will become a reality, personally. But that's my point of view, and a lot of people within the know have been interviewed on the subject of having a team in London or a team in Europe, and said it's not financially viable. It won't work because you've got to sell that to the US market, and you've got to have 8 games at home. So I don't know really. It's a good question though. It's a good talking point. Will the NFL have a team in London? Will the NFL continue to poach rugby union, rugby league players? I don't know how long. The international player pathway will in my view, be an ongoing concern. I think the NFL has it wasted a lot of money there, possibly. Um, I can see a lot of CFL players being tempted by rugby union, rugby league, because the CFL doesn't have a lot of money, hasn't had a season this year, and the future for the CFL is uncertain. But if you're talking about the NFL, I don't know. NFL players, especially just squad players, a lot of them have ended up playing rugby of either code. It is possible you could convert more NFL players or American football players to rugby union, rugby league, but it's an ongoing discussion. I think the NFL realizes how the growing popularity of both codes of rugby in North America and wants to try and nip it in the bud, but is not being very, very successful in that. In fact, I think is actually starting to lose a bit of popularity because of various off and on field issues that the league has had in the last decade or so that are starting to mount more and more. And therefore, long term, we'll have to see what happens. But the growth of rugby union in America is therefore to see, with the fact that Major League Rugby is successful. In my view, it's definitely successful. A lot of them, as I say, if you look at the Major League Rugby rosters, there's a fair few players in those squads who have played collegiately American football. A lot of them obviously played union as well, but there's a fair few converts from American football to rugby playing in Major League Rugby, and that is a very interesting point. I can see more and more American football players, especially CFL players, making that conversion, because the CFL has a very uncertain future right now, and we don't know what's happening. No, I haven't got punched. It's just the lighting in the room. That's second question we asked on that. Oh, I haven't got punched in the face. No, it's just the lighting in the room. If I move my head, it looks like I'll be punched. Move my head this way, it looks like I have. Another interesting point is the NHL hasn't announced a return to play date for this coming season. The AHL, their affiliate league, the league below, has announced that they will be returning by the 6th of February. So that gives a sort of time frame when the NHL would be returning by. So that's 90 odd days away. It's an interesting one. The NHL wants to play a season because they have a TV deal to negotiate. They don't have a current TV deal post 2021, so they cannot afford not to be playing this season. The longer they leave it, the shorter the season will be. The playoffs didn't get the TV figures that they were hoping over the summer. And Gary Bettman has come out and stated that they want to get some sort of season played. It's better than no hockey at all. So the NHL is a watch this space with any kind of announcements with bubble cities, divisional arrangements, fixturing. It looks very likely that we'll have a 48 to 60 game shortened season, very similar to the two lockout shortened seasons of yesteryear. They do not want a repeat of the 2004-2005 season when no hockey got played in the NHL level. But very few hockey leagues are actually playing right now. A lot of leagues have suspended play indefinitely, including here in the UK with the Elite League and the National League having no set return date. And with the current lockdown that's been announced, there was plans to have some trial games with fans in attendance in November in the National League for a couple of teams to play a mini round robin tournament. I believe that's now been scrapped because of this current new lockdown that we're about to head into on Thursday. The issues surrounding the fact that there's been a lack of hockey played, and some teams would not have played for the best part of a year come February next year. 7 NHL teams would not have played for 11 months by that point. The AHL, no team would have played for 11 months because of their suspension of season. There are concerns that players may return to play not being fit, risk of injury. Some players will be fresher than others. So the team owners and GMs will be having meetings with the NHL, but there is no definite date where the NHL says we are returning to play. But it's looking likely there'll be 4 bubble cities. The 4 divisions will play like an internal mini league kind of thing. When we come to playoffs, fans may be allowed in attendance, but we're looking at January at the earliest as a start date, as things currently stand with the NHL. But normally at this point we're a month into the season, but the longer they leave it, the less chance the less games that will be played. They will have to come to a decision soon about a return to play. And part of that is to do with the expiring TV deal and Seattle's expansion. These are things that are playing on the NHL and need to be considered, is that they are expanding this year coming. Seattle is joining the league next year. They've got an expansion draft to sort out. They have, to figure out how to get the Stanley Cup final played, preferably before the Olympics. If the Olympics does take place in Tokyo on the 23rd, I think it's the 23rd of July. The Olympics are due to start in Tokyo. They want to obviously avoid a clash because of TV. The TV audience will switch off the hockey and go to the and look at the the TV deal and the discussions around, will ESPN have it? Will NBC retain the rights? Will Fox bid full rights? In Canada, you've got Sportsnet and TSN. So Rogers owns Sportsnet. So you've only got two providers in Canada, but in the US, you've got multiple carriers who all will want to bid on the competition. On the women's side of rugby union, it is a bit concerning that one team is so dominant. But that's what happens when you have a professional setup, when the other unions cannot afford a professional setup. There you go. You could argue that yes, the Kiwis and the England women's are there's a massive gap between New Zealand and England and the rest of the world when it comes to rugby union. There is, I watched the Women's World Cup a couple of years ago in Ireland on TV, and there was a massive gap in quality between England, New Zealand, and the rest. It's still good fun to watch the other teams play. I mean, Italy are very, very competitive. In fact, more so than the Welsh and the Scottish. That is something that does surprise me, that the Italian women's team is actually far more competitive than the men's. The French women's team is quite a competitive unit as well. They have some very, very good players for the level that they play at. But yeah, the gap is there. And it is concerning that there is such a big gap between the top two teams in the world and everyone else. There are ways to mitigate that, but it's mostly a university game, an amateur club game. That's the difference. A lot of these women do have second jobs, so there in itself answers your question. The fact that the next batch, Ireland, France, and Italy, are again a step ahead of Wales and Scotland, tells you all you need to know. There is a gap between England, then the next three, and then France, Italy, and Ireland, and then Scotland and Wales lag far behind. And that is a concern for two reasons. Scottish and Welsh sport is poorly funded at grassroots level in comparison to England. Italy is a bit, and France are a bit different, especially in Italy. The community sporting club is there, so these rugby clubs will also have tennis and gymnastics, and swimming, and volleyball, and they will be community kind of clubs on the European model. France, they have a lot of input from the men's side of the game. They're a wealthy union as well. Scotland and Wales do lag behind, especially at government grassroots level and investment. The issues are historically well known. And yes, the fact that the England's women's game does have a pretty much professional setup when it comes to the women's game, especially the top 9 teams, it increases player depth, more participation. A lot of these women are full-time. Not all, but a lot of them are. There is the gap. If you train more regularly, you're playing at a higher standard at club level. You're going to be better. End of. You've got that talent depth. You've got more players to choose from, which again sums up the problem that Scotland and Wales have in comparison to everyone else in the Six Nations. You know, Italy and France and Ireland have given England a fair run for their money in many a game. It's not just England winning all the time, but Wales and Scotland do significantly lag far behind in player development, player depth, participation than the other four nations in the Six Nations on the women's side of things. There is a gap there that cannot be denied, is significant. And in the Southern Hemisphere, New Zealand are well ahead of Australia and other Southern Hemisphere teams as well when it comes to competitiveness and strength. I think the Japanese have more registered female players than Scotland and Wales combined. So that just tells you that there is a lot of ground to be made up. The USA and Canada have a very good women's setup as well. They have a lot of university players and a growing game there. So yeah, the lack of talent is one, but the lack of participation is another. And you look at the unions as well. Scotland and Wales at union level during the height of lockdown were cutting jobs. They were laying off staff. Players were taking, on the men's game, were taking massive wage cuts in order for the unions to be sustainable. So there are financial concerns as well at governance side of the game, and the Welsh regions are in financial chaos in the men's side, let alone the women's side. If you want to talk about women's club rugby, there in the men's side of the game, there are massive problems with finances in Wales. It's a well documented issue. It doesn't matter if you have a team from Swansea or a team from Cardiff. There are massive financial problems in the Welsh game that are very historical, that date back to the early 2000s when the Pro League was set up, because the Welsh domestic club game collapsed pretty much overnight financially. So funding is a massive issue, which is well highlighted, and isn't going away. That's a plain and simple fact. And while, especially the Welsh have been very, very successful in the Six Nations under Warren Gatland, new coach, new problems. New coach, same problems. The financials, I mean, going into the World Cup last year, a lot of the Welsh players didn't know if they were going to have clubs to play for post-World Cup. And their selection rules for the national side are over-protectionist, which doesn't help, and very prohibitive in the best talent going to play where they want. So the clubs cannot afford to pay the salaries of the French clubs. But in order to play for Wales, you have to have a certain amount of caps before you can play abroad, or you have to get paid less. And that, I think, hampers the game. If you want to make the game global, and this is the issue that was raised when it came to the World Rugby elections between Bill Beaumont and Augustine Pichot. Pichot was arguing that there needs to be a financial restructuring in order to make the game fairer for all and allow the development of the game at professional level and grow the game professionally. The issues, especially in countries of tier 1 nation status like Wales, are well known. People saying, "I'll kick Italy out of the Six Nations." Well, the way the Welsh Rugby Union's going, Welsh Rugby Union could go bust long before Italy get kicked out of the Six Nations and replaced. You could say it's a bit of a stretch, but at the same time, it's the finances of the Welsh game have been struggling for pre-COVID. We're talking 2003, that the Celtic Warriors lasted a season and went bust. Before that, there were issues with the professional clubs in Wales converting from amateur semi-pro status to full professional status. Professionalism hasn't worked in Wales. Doesn't matter about the fact that the population of Wales is equivalent to southwest England. I mean, I think about 4 million, 5 million people in Wales. The same problems are being replicated in Super Rugby. The South Africans have basically decided to leave Super Rugby en masse, all the teams, and voted to join the Pro League setup. Rugby Australia is in complete financial turmoil. New Zealand, the fact that they can keep producing world-class talent is one thing, but financially the game is getting massively stretched. I don't know how long the current state of play financially can be sustained in the Southern Hemisphere. It's not working very well financially, and this is the argument that Pichot had in the run into that World Rugby election. was that the finances aren't sustainable because too much money is held with too few players in the top end talent, and not enough is making it to the lower levels of the game and the developing areas of the game and the lower paid professionals in the game. So there's a reason why Christian Wade has decided to try his hand at American football. It's not just like he just got bored of playing rugby. There are reasons why a top class player, Christian Wade, standing in the game, has left the game. The fact that the RFU have lost so much money since March tells you that even the wealthiest union in the world has an unsustainable structure. And yes, you could say COVID has sped up some of these problems. The TV deals aren't great. You could argue that BT and Sky Sports and Premier Sports, the TV deals they have, they need to be looked at. You could argue for more free-to-air coverage to increase viewership and increase fan base. Same could be argued for rugby league, to be fair, but COVID and the pandemic has highlighted a lot of the problems. Yeah, it has massively. Same with football. The wealthiest sport in the world is the most unbalanced sport in the world. The biggest global sport in the world is on its knees and keeps regularly shooting itself in the foot. The capacity for professional sport to self-harm knows no bounds. And also Ryan Giggs is in a bit of hot water for apparently beating up his girlfriend, but this is a guy who was knobbing his brother's wife for 5 years and then had a gagging order in relation to having an affair with Imogen Thomas. So Ryan Giggs, what a great role model for young Welsh players coming through. It's okay to cheat on your wife, lie to your brother and cheat with his wife, and beat up your missus, allegedly. Ryan Giggs, what a role model, eh? But all jokes aside, and I hope Ryan Giggs hasn't done what he's accused of, because if he has, that is the lowest of the low, and he deserves to be sacked as Wales manager and hung out to dry, to be brutally honest. But COVID has exposed a lot of things, and it's exposed how badly run and governed sport has been for too long, decades. What we are seeing is, actually, no. Ryan Giggs is of a mixed race background. That is actually a known fact. I think one of his grandparents was actually Afro-Caribbean. That is actually a known fact. That is not. He's claiming that is truth. But the whole gig situation, I think the Welsh FA need to have a long, hard think about going forward with him as manager, because if these allegations are proven to be correct and he has only been arrested and we don't know if he's been charged or he's been questioned or what, there's been a bit of a media mixed messages coming out of the media, but if he is charged with an offence, that creates a problem for the Welsh FA. That really does create a problem, and the direction they don't take and the action then they take, because he's instant to proven guilty under a court of law. But this is a guy who has had a fair bit of off-field drama in the last decade that has somewhat stained his image and his career. What will he be remembered for? Being a one-club man with Man United and winning so many trophies and playing till he was over 40. Play his entire career with one club and having such success with one club and have all those winners' medals, or will he be, known for having a colourful private life that, regularly made the press, that, is very, very damaging to the public image of the sport? Because this is a guy who tried to get a super injunction to cover up the fact of his infidelity over a long period of time. We all knew it was him. It was kind of obvious it was him very early on, but this is a guy who, on the field, is a brilliant player. Off the field, bit of a shitty piece of work. Not a nice guy. So we'll have to see what happens. The Welsh FA will have to have a long considered approach, but they may see fit to remove him from his post permanently. It's not a positive look. If the Welsh FA back him, it's not great. It's a bit of a messy situation. They have to weigh up their options and act accordingly. But I can't. I think it's going to, as time progresses, it may get harder and harder for Ryan Giggs to keep his job. Let's be honest on that. He's in a bit of hot water if these allegations are proven to be true. They are proved to be true, then yeah, it's not a look that I think the Welsh FA want. It's a story that the Welsh FA would rather wasn't there. It's not a positive image that they want to promote, because if they do back him, it's like they're backing domestic violence as an acceptable thing. And what we've seen during lockdown with, several high-profile athletes getting themselves in hot water with comments in relation to domestic violence. It's a tricky one, especially for football as a sport which has had a lot of negative headlines in the last 7-8 months. It's a sport that hasn't covered itself in glory in the past when it comes to players, coaches, pundits, and other media reporters, bringing the game into disrepute. Like I mentioned, Dan Rowan in there. I've done a video on him that still gets views, by the way. The Dan Rowan video that I did, very divisive moment following that helicopter accident. But yeah, he was caught making some pretty inappropriate comments. Managed to keep his job somehow. But Leicester City fans have said if he comes and reports on our games, he won't get a very warm reception and may not leave the city in one piece. They didn't take kindly to his off-the-cuff remarks that were picked up on a mic because he forgot to turn his mic off. That divided opinion and still divides opinion 2 years later. Neil Warnock's nearing retirement. Neil Warnock, he divides opinions, but he says this. He famously said this: "If I'm not getting booed by the opposition, I'm not doing my job properly." And I actually, to be fair, he might not have won any trophies, but my God, he's been a long-serving manager to the game. He has passion. Look at the players who played under him who've gone on to have really great careers. The fact he keeps going around for another round of management. But I think the game will be lesser for him not being in it. You can say, oh, he's not a very good manager, or his tactics are outdated. But I'll tell you this: the game without Neil Warnock is a lesser game because he's one of the few characters we have left. He has passion and enthusiasm for the sport. He doesn't hold back in his interviews either. He does make me chuckle with some of the things he says, but he does say this: if I'm not getting booed by the opposition on match day, I ain't doing my job correctly. And a lot of fans have said, regardless if he's coached them or not, he'll be a loss to the game when he does finally decide to hang up and retire from management and then call it quits. He's been close to retiring several times, but the passion he has for the game, regardless of his accomplishments as a manager or lack of, if you wish to put it that way, is one of the reasons why we keep watching the game. I think the sport will be less without him in it. Is good old Neil Warnock. Whether you agree with his management style or his tactics or how he goes about managing teams, he doesn't hold back. And the game will be lesser without him. That's my opinion on Neil Warnock. I think he's a great addition to the game because he's a character, and we are fast running out of characters where you can go, actually, he may divide opinion, but my God, he says stuff that makes you want to listen. Whether you agree with what he's saying or not, he is a character, and sport needs characters. And I think we're getting a bit too sterile with our professional sporting athletes and managers and pundits. There's not enough characters left in the game. There's not enough characters in sport who just say what they think. And Neil Warnock's have copped a fair few fines from the FA for being outspoken at times. And sometimes, what he says makes a lot of sense if you think about it. When there's baffling decisions. And a referee goes, ex-referees have said, if Neil Warnock isn't abusing me, Christ, I'm not doing my job right. If Neil Warnock is staying quiet on the touchline, I'm not doing my job right. Because if you haven't got, Warnock giving some ripping into an official during a game, the official knows, I'm not doing my job right. other managers saying if Neil Warnock's quiet on the touchline, it's a crap game. Let's just say that. So he does divide opinion, but my God, the energy he puts into it, we don't have enough characters like that. And crikey, imagine if he had won trophies, then we'll be having a different conversation about his managerial success or lack of. Um, but I think, yeah, when Neil Warnock retires, much like when Tony Pulis retires from management, I think, yeah, the game is lesser without those kind of characters, regardless of their success or lack of. At the moment, there's too many sterile characters. You don't have that kind of energy. I think Mourinho's a bit of the pantomime villain at times. But I think, yeah, you kind of need them in the sport just to make it a bit lively and fun. Otherwise, it's just sterile PR coached media interviews. I think you do need a bit of feistiness from a manager when it comes to a press conference, rather than just monotone, coached, PR, sterile. This is where I kind of like Warnock, because he just says what's right. It's like Stuart Pearce as well. He doesn't hold back in his interviews. He will give it some as well. And I think the game is better for that. We need a little bit more of that, I think, in this. I mean, the social media generation, I think the social media has sort of killed off a little bit of the passion, I think, from some. But no, I like a bit of Neil Warnock's passion. Whether I think he's a good manager or not is another thing. He is very good at avoiding relegation and getting teams promoted as well to leagues above. So he does have a use within the game, especially at the lower levels. I think at the lower levels of the game, I think, yeah, he's a perfect type of manager just to put some fighting spirit into a team. But it's either or really. You could say Brian Clough was a character, and yes, the game is less throughout with him not being in it. And he had his demons very well documented. I think they hampered him as a manager, even though he was very successful. Brian Clough, famous alcoholic, and that did hamper him, was his alcoholism. But at the same time, imagine how successful he would have been if he wasn't a drunk. Imagine that. Just imagine that if Brian Clough wasn't an alcoholic, imagine how many more trophies he could have won as a manager with Forest or Derby, because he won trophies with Derby County as well. Imagine how much more successful in management he would have been. Just think on that. Yeah, I think Steven Gerrard doesn't. I don't think he's good in front of the cameras in interviews, but I think on the touchline, I think in the dressing room, that's a different thing. What we see in the public perception on camera, some people aren't very confident in front of the camera. Off camera, I think, yeah, he's a bit different. I think he's a feisty scouser. There's a reason why Rangers are having a great start to the season and why he's done amazing things to turn them around from where they were. It could be very interesting this season in Scotland, but it depends if we can get a season completed without a lockdown. Under the government plans that we currently have, professional sport will continue. How long that can continue for, looking at the Super League, for example, in rugby league, with whole chaos saying we're not going to complete the season, and the finals being pushed forward to a 16 format rather than 8, tells you that there could be some creaking in the government statement saying elite sport would continue during the second lockdown, which didn't happen in the first. That's something to be considered. So Rangers have had a great start to the SPL season, but will the SPL be able, and the Premier League and the Championship, will they be able to complete their seasons? That's a separate question entirely. And look at Super League; they've been hampered with so many games not being able to be played because of positive tests. So questions have to be asked about, okay, if these professional sports are going to continue, biosecurity measures, playing in bubbles. Other sports have done the bubble situation, and player power saying we don't want that. So we run the risk of another sporting lockdown, which would be catastrophic for so many sports. The cricket players were against going into bubbles, and the ECB cannot afford any more losses. It's plain and simple. Ice hockey, just the Elite League and the English Ice Hockey Association came out and said we're going to indefinitely suspend the season. We cannot afford not to have fans in attendance. So it's it's an interesting one about how sport proceeds going forward. But there's only a couple of European ice hockey leagues playing right now, so I don't know how much longer professional sport can be immune from shutting down. I really don't. I really don't. So yeah, that's another thing I wish to talk about is how long can professional sport, not just in the UK but across Europe, continue without shutting down. Um, Football is the main one. It's going to be very interesting to see how football goes in the next couple of months. I wouldn't be surprised if football does shut down, and then that opens up a whole host of other debates to do with the financial side of it, and teams possibly going bust. If rugby unions in chaos and the lower leagues of football are in financial meltdown, another shutdown would definitely be the death knell for so many teams. So many teams will not survive another lockdown. And as it stands, without fans in attendance, a lot of teams are going to the wall anyway. So that'll be an interesting discussion point about government plan to keep sport going during this lockdown, but I'm not sure if it can. I have concerns that it might not be able to. And then that raises questions about next year with the World Championship Ice Hockey and the Six Nations. While it has been moved to accommodate fans, whether the Six Nations will go ahead, the Olympics, Rugby League World Cup, a whole host of things next year that need to um, whether they'll go ahead or not. So it's a lot of discussion points. I think a lot of discussion points. It's a difficult one. It's a very difficult one in regards to how sport can continue. Just reading through the headlines, rugby league, I think he's lucky that they decided to push forward the finals because I don't think if they carried on to a full term season that they would have actually got to that stage. It would have been shut down with the amount of positive tests. Rugby union, Christ, Wasps, they're lucky their seasons just got completed on the club side of things. But whether they can restart next year and have a shortened season, who knows? Will Wasps even be a team next season? That's another question to look at. But, so many questions that we don't have the answers to yet, but it's looking more and more likely that I believe that professional sport will get shut down again. I can't see it going to term without a shutdown. There are concerns about the FA Cup at the lower levels, games getting played. There's concerns about finances, and with no fans being allowed into grounds, the non-league and lower league clubs definitely face going out of business. And what then for the future of the sport going forward? It is concerning, and the implications are there. What has been exposed, the reckless financial mismanagement, especially in football, that's been going on for years. Clubs have gone out of business, and more clubs will go out of business. There is no doubt on that. There is no doubt in my mind that, as things stand, football is not sustainable without massive change that will have to come out of this. The fact that the PFA have basically told players not to take pay cuts or deferrals is striking how out of touch they are. And the TV deal needs to be looked at. The governance side of it needs to be looked at. And rugby union and rugby league are going the same way as football, and it's just not sustainable, and it cannot be sustainable long term. There needs to be some kind of change at some point. It cannot carry on as it is. Whether the money bubble would have burst at some point in the next 5 or 10 years, that's up for debate. COVID has sped up the process and has highlighted that the sport is unsustainable as it is and needs to change. So that's another debating point. We'll have to see what happens with the NHL announcing a start date, whether the Super League can get to term with the finals, because if any more teams have positive tests, that throws the top six into question, whether that can actually be sustainable and we actually get a grand final. Then the question mark turns to State of Origin tomorrow in Australia. That's going to be very, very interesting in regards to they're playing in Adelaide, first game, then Brisbane, then Sydney. They're going to have a shortened off season. Will the World Club Challenge take place? That's something else. Will the World Club Challenge take place between the Melbourne Storm and whoever wins the Super League? Will that actually be a thing this year? Who will be the 12th Super League team for next season? Teams have to bid for it. Will it be the London Broncos? Will it be Toulouse Olympique? Featherstone, York? Who will be that 12th team? Because it won't be Toronto. That's something else that needs to be figured out by the RFL and the Super League, and there needs to be structural change there as well. Cannot believe that the RFL have basically been told what to do by the clubs. That shows weak governance there. There's so many questions that need answering, and the situation keeps changing. But I wouldn't be surprised if sport in Europe at least gets shut down at some point this winter. And the implications of that and the financial implications of that are, well, quite real. But as I said earlier in the live stream, the sports will continue in some form. It's just how many teams survive at this point, because some leagues haven't even restarted. Some leagues have completely shut down. Well, the fact that Toronto have basically been told that it's not viable them being in the Super League for next season kind of is a hint to the Ottawa setup that that's not going to be viable either. The Super League clubs basically have spoken. The RFL, I think it was a very, very, very expensive vanity trip, really. I don't think the sustainability idea was really there. And so that the RFL questions have to be answered by the RFL about allowing Toronto to have a license to begin with, in order for them to compete in the league structure in Europe. And the fact it has failed, and they're not even sure to field a team next season, so that then leads to a rejigging. I mean, look, there already is an East Coast rugby league, semi-pro league in the US and Canada that already does exist. Surely it would make more sense to turn that league professional at some point, rather than just say we're having a team in Toronto and a team in Ottawa. I can't see the Ottawa team being as viable either, and I can see it giving another expensive failure, which does nothing positive for rugby league. But rugby league in Australia has gone through the same thing with reckless expansion where there's no real viability plan. The fact that rugby league lacks an international governing body as well is also a problem. There are rule variations between the Super League and the NRL, State of Origin and international level. There's different rules for different leagues. There needs to be a unified international governing body. Even ice hockey has the IIHF. Rugby league doesn't have that. I don't know what the future holds. I think Toronto, if that experiment has run its course, I can't see the Ottawa experiment doing any better. And with the situation as it is, with travel restrictions, lockdowns, this pandemic not going anywhere, I can't see it working. I can see it being another expensive failure. And the RFL, this is an organisation that doesn't have a lot of money. And this is an organisation that had to seek government assistance in order for the sport to survive at grassroots level, let alone at the Super League level. This is a sport that has a very poor TV deal, which does nothing to help grow the game. This is a sport that is very protectionist of its M62 corridor kind of heartland, and hasn't done enough, in my view, to grow the game in non-traditional areas in Europe, let alone Canada. The Midlands and the south of England has been overlooked. The failure in Wales, uh, the lack of growth in Scotland, or the lack of player depth in Scotland. This is a sport that regularly shoots itself in the foot. It's more successful in Australia because, well, there's more grassroots clubs playing in every state and territory in Australia. They have been to Perth before. They have been to Adelaide before. They dipped the toe in the water. The Perth experiment failed not because they weren't wealthy enough or didn't make enough money. It was the travel. Travel was a bit prohibitive, and they hadn't factored that kind of issue in. And then the Super League War came along, and that really did balls things up for viability. But rugby league could work in Perth, in Australia, at the NRL level. They just chose for it not to, plain and simply. But even then, there are concerns about financial viability of clubs. The situation is quite stark. The TV deal in this country for rugby league is shocking, and Sky has all the cards. Sky could just turn the taps off if they really wanted to, and the sport would be really up the Swanee then. And there is an argument for getting at least the Championship and League One on free-to-air TV. I could definitely see an argument for that. And I can see an argument for a far better TV deal than it currently has. I think you could definitely grow the game outside the north of England quite easily. The RFL just chooses not to. And when teams like the London Broncos have a decent chance of, returning to the Super League, they hamstring them. So we'll have to see what happens. I mean, whether Toulouse get in there or the Broncos get in there, it's an interesting one. I think Toulouse, they're a very good. I mean, there's a lot of French players playing for Toulouse and Catalan, so that's good for the French side of development. And they both got rich histories, and the French game is historical and is well played in their traditional heartland in the southwest of France. But they tried moving a team to Paris. PSG had a rugby league team for a while. It didn't work. They just expected it to work in Paris because Racing 92 and Stade Francais play a rugby union there. It didn't. It failed. It was another expensive failure. So rugby league has a habit of going to non-traditional locations and just expecting the game to work rather than looking at, can we build a player base? Can we attract players and fans? They put teams in places where they do no research and it fails. So the RFL has a track record, and the NRL, for that matter, have a track record of expanding into locations without doing their due diligence and then making it a very expensive failure that does nothing for the image of the game apart from negativity. And then the rugby league press, you can't win, but I do think if you want to expand, you have to be. I mean, we have the Broncos, we have the Scholars. I think there is a chance for rugby league to work in the south of England outside of London. There is a chance. There's a lot of Northerners and a lot of Australians and Kiwis living in the south of England. That there is a chance that it could work and work very, very well. But the RFL are obsessed with protecting the M62 corridor, and that's holding the sport back. The TV deal doesn't help either, reaching a wider audience and growing the game outside of Yorkshire and Lancashire and Cheshire. It really isn't where it should be. It should be a national game. It should be a global game. I'm a massive fan of it, and I'm a Southerner, and that shouldn't be the case. I used to love watching the Challenge Cup and the old Championship on the old free-to-air and on TV before the Super League. I used to love watching it as a kid. Still do. But I find the NRL is a much better competition. It's a higher standard of play. It's a fast game in the NRL. The quality level is higher. The player depth is higher. It's a known fact. But I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for watching this short little live stream. There will be obviously more videos to follow. Obviously, State of Origin starts tomorrow. I will be watching that when I get in from work. And for now, thank you very much for watching. I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.